Welcome Internet to Psychoanalytic Talk, and today we're going to be talking about the omnipotent control. So it's a defense mechanism that's a primary, or as we would say in French, archaic, which means that it's one of the first chronologically defense mechanisms to appear within the human mind. I.e., it's one of those defenses that's very deep and very strong when it gets going. So what is it precisely? Well, very simply, the omnipotent control is this idea that the individual has the feeling that they are somewhat capable of reshaping reality to their will, or making reality bend to their will. So this defense mechanism is often used by people that feel that they are grandiose or superior. This is the more pathological side of the defense, right? But it sometimes is used by these people to rewrite reality. What I mean by that is that they do not see any difference between their will and the ones of others. When other people express their will, it is often met with conflict or with mystification, or what we will now call gaslighting, where people basically say that hasn't happened. So the omnipotent defense is both interpersonal, i.e., it can be there to try and control or use some coercion mentally to someone else, but it can also be internal, i.e., inner psychic, which means that basically the individual feels that because they want something to go in a certain way, it's going to happen. So like I was saying, in more pathological cases and scenarios, this defense mechanism is there in a way to protect the individual from blowback and, in a way, the shattering of their feeling of agency. Because what you have to remember is if this defense takes hold, it's because the person is so fragile that they cannot tolerate anything that diverges from their own will. Thus, their will is all powerful. As a very young, if you go to Kleinian explanations, a very young infant, when they cry, mother or the caregiver comes and basically feeds them or solves the problem. And we can link back the two phenomenons that the will of the baby is to be fed, or at least for the displeasurable elements to just be alleviated. Therefore, when mother comes and fixes the problem, what happens is that in a way it gives reason for the baby to think that their will can basically shape the world. And this is a defense, again, that just grows up to adulthood. And the issue is that when there is no renunciation, when people do not give up, or are not taught to give up without it being destructive of their identities, they tend to use this defense mechanism to try and basically bend the world to them. And because this is done because the alternative is not possible, they are too fragile in a way to show any flexibility. Therefore, it's like as if two parallel lines were going. And what happens is, instead of the individual trying to adapt and touch the line, what is happening is that they're trying to bend through their minds, through their psychology, the world to them. So fundamentally, this defense can be very pathological. It can almost touch, in certain cases, on the delusional thinking, that the belief that something is there because you will it to be. It also has some level of connection with magical thinking, as it obviously is a process that is, in those pathological elements, detached from reality. And one could even say that there is a denial of reality. And I'm not going to list all the pathologies in which you can find them, but it's mainly present in severe personality organizations such as severe narcissism, borderline, and sometimes even psychotic episodes like schizophrenia or bipolar disorders sometimes. But what I'm trying to say is that fundamentally, when it's used that way, it's because the individual is too fragile, too, in a way, weak to be able to adapt. Therefore, it's a world that has to adapt to them. And obviously, when this does not work, it creates a massive form of rage within the individual, or, very interestingly enough, it can lead to a denial of what has happened or not happened. And if one is to confront the individual towards that, but this is not exactly what you said, the person might just shrug it off, saying that they were never saying that you got it wrong, that you misinterpreted, or they might just go into a form of conflict and attack the individual they have in front of them, be it the therapist, a family member, and so on and so forth. Now, you might be interested in knowing that there is a version of this which is non-pathological, because here I insisted a lot on the pathologicalness, and I think that when it's pathological, it's much more easily observable than when it's, let's say, more neurotic or with a personality structure that is more, how can I say, stable. Omnipotent control can happen sometimes, but it's more of this feeling that if you try hard enough, you can have it or you can achieve it. And it sometimes borders in normal people on the feelings of megalomania. Those moments where there's a form of elation of, yes, it can be achieved, it can be done, I can change the world. That kind of narrative can sometimes be found in everybody. But at the core, there is a form of omnipotent control, as what is happening is that there is a feeling that the world can be bent. And at that point where there is a form of bendedness involved within the world, one is in a form of omnipotent control. However, in normal personalities, what happens very quickly is that it's all nuanced of, this is my wish, I would like it so much. Or the person then basically takes a step back and says, yes, this is not going to happen. Being able to, in a way, nuance what is happening, take a step back from the defense. This is often the case in, how can I say, neurotic level personalities, to use Kernberg's framework, or let's say more stable in terms of identity individuals, that they basically, even if they have moments of primitive defenses, they can take a step back, analyze it, and be able to criticize it, which, again, in pathological circumstances, or in people who have pathological personalities or severe pathological personalities, that basically that ability to take a step back is not necessarily compromised per se, but it's much, much harder. Therefore, it is so they're completely engulfed in their own defense mechanism, making it very hard to see outside of it. And in terms of pathological cases, it's often there to save their narcissism or their self-esteem, because it's so fragile that everything has to bend to their will. If not, if something doesn't bend, that means that they might be destroyed. And that is terrifying for everyone, but for people that cannot take a step back, it's even worse. Now, fundamentally, what I want to say with all of this is that the omnipotent control defense mechanism can be seen, at least how I see it, is an extension of the schizoparanoid position in which the baby feels themselves all powerful, that their will is everything, and that they, through their minds, can create the object, i.e. the relationship. And often what happens is that during the evolution, the development of the infant is taught, is basically offered by the parent the ability to grieve, to renounce, what Melanie Klein very interestingly called the depressive position. Depressive here meaning grieving, a grieving position. And in omnipotent control, this is exactly what is not happening. There is no grieving of the situation. And the situation, because it cannot exist as the person thinks of it or basically wills it, there is a denial of reality that comes into play, meaning that the individual cannot attest to reality, therefore they will write in it through their will. And there's also this idea that their will basically is the will of the universe. So we can also see, if we link it back to the schizoparanoid position, or the paranoid schizoid, I always invert them because in French it's schizoparanoid, and in English it's paranoid schizoid. So I'm sorry for that. Anyway, the aim of what I'm trying to say is that when the baby is very young, they feel that they're all powerful, that they can change everything. The corollary of that is persecution anxiety. And in the same way that omnipotent control is the same sin, the individual feels that they can change the world, but in turn it creates persecution anxiety, because if they're all powerful, then other people can be all powerful. Therefore, it's virtually a system in which it's destroy or be destroyed. Because if you give yourself all powerfulness, then by default, other people are going to be all powerful. Those don't bend. Therefore, it's a struggle for survival in the mind of the people who use that defense on a primitive level and cannot take a step back. Of course, and I must say this, omnipotent defenses can be worked on, right? It's not something that is necessarily going to stay the same throughout the whole life. It can be alleviated. It can, as a therapist, you can help patients take a step back and try and analyze what type of fantasy they're having right there at that point. And also, I should just end on this, that even though it seems very massive and very, how can I say, extreme when I'm talking about it right now, it can happen to anyone. The whole perspective is to try and take a step back, as I was saying. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you in the next one.